Derek, I think you're probably good to go get started.
All right, that sounds good. I'll start off here by introducing myself. I'm Derek Ingbolson. I'm a biologist and project manager for the Drain 27 Wetland Restoration Project. I work for the Army Corps of Engineers. First of all, I'd just like to thank everybody for dialing in here today and logging on. This is a little different than how we normally like to do our public meetings. We like to have these face-to-face and get that informal dialogue before and after the meeting, but with COVID and the nature of public meetings, not knowing how many people would show up, this was the best option available. So we're gonna work through this. We've got, we've had a few different go-arounds with online meetings now. It's becoming more of the norm. Hopefully we don't have any technical difficulties, but if we do, please just stay with us and we'll work to do the best we can to get it going again. I mentioned just before I started that if you have any questions, to try to use that chat feature. If you look toward the bottom of your screen, it kind of shows the recording, the video, the mic, and then there's a function that says show conversation. If you hit that button, you can type a message in on the right-hand side of your screen. Please use that if you have questions that come up during the meeting. That way at the end we can go through those questions and make sure everything gets covered. And then we'll also unmute everybody at the end and ask questions and take those verbally as well. So I guess to start off here, I would like to introduce Joel Paulson, the Executive Director of the Diversion Authority. They're the project sponsor to this project, and just let him say a few words about the project. So Joel, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. Appreciate the intro. My name is Joel Paulson, the Executive Director for the Diversion Authority. So as we continue to work through the implementation of the project, we're working with our federal partners, the Corps of Engineers. And so this project is a Corps of Engineers project, and it is a mitigation project related to compensating for the wetlands that we are removing as we implement the southern embankment and control structures. And so we need to, according to federal environmental laws, we need to compensate for those wetlands that were removed. And so this is the reestablishment of those existing wetlands. So I do thank everyone for hopping on the line here. As Derek had mentioned, it's not ideal to be sitting in a virtual setting like this. I think we all would prefer to have these types of meetings face to face, so we could interact and gain comments from the public and incorporate any ideas or comments and concerns into our project process. So we do welcome comments, and as Derek had mentioned, he'll provide plenty of time at the end of this presentation to take comments and interact in a dialogue format. So thank you very much for attending, and I'll turn it back to Derek so he can get started with the presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. And I think it's also worth mentioning with the comments piece that we did have a meeting previously on April 30th with some of the impacted landowners, and some of the comments we got from them will also be used as feedback to improve this project as much as possible. We've also had, a number of meetings just with our project team to come up with the best design possible. And then also with different state and federal agencies, we've had we just had a meeting last week to get their input. And that included such agencies as North Dakota Game and Fish and North Dakota Department of Environmental Quality and the State Water Commission, as well as a bunch of others. So we're taking comments not only from the public, but also from those agencies during this time as well. With that, I'm going to move on to the next slide. The first slide of the meeting here, and this is just an agenda just to give you an idea of what to expect over the next half hour or so. First, we're going to just talk a little bit about the larger picture, the FM Diversion Project, and most people are pretty familiar with it right now, but just a quick slide on that. Then we're going to jump into a little bit of wetland background, If you were on that April 30th call, some of these slides might look familiar. We just want to make sure that people are all educated on what the wetlands are, what that means, and so forth. Then we'd like to go into reasons why this was chosen as the Wetland Restoration Project. There's a number of different options out there. Those weren't all, the same. There's pros and cons to each of them. Ultimately, this was the one that was chosen, and we'll go through that. Then we'll move into the design. We've got a lot of really good people working on this, and we've gotten a lot of feedback from the agencies and trying to make this the best that we can. We've got the mitigation that we need to fulfill, but we're working with those agencies to make sure that they've got goals and objectives when it might come to habitat or other things. And if we can help meet those needs as well, we might as well incorporate some features that would help with that. So we'll talk about design and what all went into that. Then we'll move into the impacts. So this meeting is a NEPA environmental assessment meeting. NEPA is National Environmental Policy Act. It's a federal law that we have to follow with federal projects. And with that, we put out the environmental assessment. We'll go through that a little bit later. But we'll want to go through those impacts, disclose them, make sure we're transparent with what's going on with the project. After that, we'll move into the schedule, let you guys know what to expect over the next couple years, when we anticipate certain things taking place. And then we'll finally move into comments and questions from all you folks on the line. So next slide. All right, so the overall project, the project is a large project. It's split delivery. There's two pieces to it. There's the diversion channel, which is the light blue color. If you can see the Cheyenne River Aqueduct kind of toward the southwest portion there. You also see the diversion inlet structure. Where the diversion inlet structure is there, that's where the two pieces of the project kind of split. You've got the diversion channel, which is a 30-mile long diversion channel stretching all the way up to the diversion channel outlet near Georgetown. Also, you've got the southern embankment, and the southern embankment includes a number of different features. If you start on the very southwest portion in the dark blue and work your way all the way across, the diversion inlet structure, the Wild Rice River structure, Red River structure, and then where it says southern embankment there, and it goes off to the east, that is the southern embankment, and that is about 21 miles in length. That's what we're going to kind of focus on, I guess, with the impacts portion of what we're about to talk about. This is a split delivery project, so the diversion channel that is being handled by P3 public-private partnership, excuse me, and then the southern embankment is where the federal money is being spent on the project. With that too, the wetland mitigation for the diversion channel is being completed within the diversion channel itself. The southern embankment and those structures along the southern embankment, that's what the Drain 27 wetland will be mitigating for. So we'll go into that a little bit more as we go along here, but next slide, please. So just a real basic touch on wetlands. What is a wetland? Wetlands have three very general characteristics. They have hydric soils, the certain hydrology, wetland hydrology, and then also vegetation. Hydric soils are a type of soil that is formed with certain conditions with wet soils, basically. So there's redoxamorphic conditions that make these soils look a certain way and act a certain way. If you can see that picture there, you see kind of the grays and the rust colors within the soils, and that's an indicator of hydric soils. There's also a number of other things that lead to hydric soils. The second one, hydrology, you have to have the right kind of water there. So if you don't have the water there, you're not going to have a wetland. You may not need as much as most people think. It doesn't have to have standing water all year long. The hydrology that's needed for a wetland is saturated conditions for 14 days, consecutive days in a year. And then finally there's the vegetation, and vegetation in wetlands isn't just what most people think of, cattails and lily pads and that sort of thing, but there's a number of different wetlands. The picture shown on the screen is actually a wetland very close to Fargo, and you can see that that's got a number of different grasses and a lot of different vegetative species, and you know, those are all categorized as being wetland species or not. You've also got species that like to have wetter feet and ones that like it a little bit drier. So those are the three main characteristics to what a wetland is. Next slide, please. So why are wetlands important? There's a number of reasons that wetlands are important. You may have heard wetlands described as the landscape's kidneys. They do a great job of filtering out contaminants and harmful things in our environment. They've gotten kind of a bad rap, I think, just because certain people tend to think of them as maybe being wastelands. They take up space, they prevent development, and they may foster diseased insects and things like that. But that's not really the case. They have a lot of great functions, including water purification. They provide flood storage. They process carbon and other nutrients. They slow down flows and help reduce erosion. And they also can lead to a number of recreational opportunities, such as hunting, bird watching, and hiking, canoeing, those sort of things. Next slide. Wetlands are also very important to the animals, the critters that are out there. Wetlands have some of the highest diversity of any ecosystem, and a lot of times you'll hear that they're just behind rainforests and coral reefs as far as diversity goes. So they're very important. Waterfowl use them a lot, obviously, and a lot of other bird species do as well along their migratory route. It's a great place for them to rest, to fuel up on vegetation or little critters that they're eating along the way. There's also several waterfowl species that may nest in wetland areas, like dabbling ducks. That includes mallards, teal, wood ducks, and several others. But they have a lot of different value to those species. And then also some of the species that you may not think of as often being out there, like salamanders or other rare and conservation type species, especially in a wetland like this one where there won't necessarily be any fish, just because there isn't a connection to a waterway most of the time, and even when there is, it'll freeze out over the winter. That's very good for those amphibian species to not have those predators in that area. Next slide. So what is wetland restoration? Wetland restoration is returning the wetland characteristics to a site. So I talked about the three different characteristics of the wetland previously. We've got the vegetation, the soils, and the hydrology. If we can get those three things back to a site, then we restore a lot of those lost functions. The vegetation, obviously, right now is row crop for the most part, and you don't see a lot of those vegetative species. The soils kind of are what they are. They are hydric soils throughout this whole area. And then the hydrology was there likely at one time, just from doing some observations and different things in this area. It's probably been drained for the last 100 years, and there's also been soil manipulation for drainage. But the belief, just looking through historical data and looking at wet signatures, is that this was at one time a wetland area before that drain was put in place. Next slide. So why is this project being considered? There's a number of different reasons. Joel talked about this a little bit in the introduction, about that we need to mitigate for unavoidable wetland impacts. And I guess the question is, where does that take place? And There were different options we looked at. We looked at a few different sites and kind of bounced back and forth, looked at the pros and cons of each, and most of them in the end ended up being kind of dead ends. After we looked at the pros and cons, they just didn't make much sense anymore. We actually looked at this site at one time and went away from it, and then when we looked at it a little bit further, we realized that at a 10-year event, even though the Fargo Moorhead project isn't in operation, there was some unintended consequences of the project with water backing up the borrow ditch. So if you're looking at the picture right here, you can see the reds and blues in the area of drain 27 where the wetland complex would go in. If you move east and south and then east again, kind of toward the southeast corner, you'll see the Wild Rice River. And at about a 10-year flood event, the Wild Rice River waters will start to back up the borrow ditch that runs along the southern side of the southern embankment, and that will fill up that area, and that's what this image is depicting right now. This is not an image of the wetland restoration site, even though it looks a lot like it. This is an image of what would happen at about a 10-year flood event. So being that the return interval on a 10-year flood event is, fairly frequent, it's really not conducive to agriculture. If you're getting flooded out every 10 years or less, that's not a very probably good spot to be planting, and we wanted to avoid any negative feedback that would come from that. So it's kind of like how do you make the best of something that is not the greatest situation? And so we had the opportunity to create this into, or restore this into wetlands, and we started looking into it more, and it started making more sense. Instead of trying to look at solutions, which we did, to try to keep this dry, it just made a lot more sense to make something wet that wants to be wet. So that's where we went with the wetland restoration with drain 27. Next slide. So this slide right here is just kind of taking a step back and looking at the southern embankment. Where is the project located? So if you're familiar with where the diversion inlet structure is and where the Wild Rice River control structure is, it's between those two, kind of in the area that is known as the camel hump area that humps up between those two structures, and it's toward the western edge, I guess, of that area. Next slide. Now the next few slides, we're going to talk about the design a little bit and go into some of the features that are in that design. Next slide. There's several features within the complex here itself. There is a ditch that I referred to earlier, and so that ditch runs around the entire southern side of the embankment, and so that will help with drainage in this area, the agricultural area. There's also a weir in yellow shown at the north end of the wetland complex. That weir will be set at an elevation of 906.3, and we'll go through a few reasons why it was set at that elevation in just a minute here. There's also the wetlands themselves. So you've got the blue and the green areas just to the south of the weir. The blue areas are shallow marsh or marsh areas, and then you've got wet meadow and seasonally inundated areas in the dark green just adjacent to that. Also within the complex, there will be upland areas. There's a 50-foot buffer around all of the wetlands, so you can imagine a 50-foot area around that green, and that's consistent with Omaha district regulatory guidelines of having a 50-foot buffer around all wetland mitigation sites. And then beyond that, there were some areas that seemed to be difficult or inaccessible for farming. So those were incorporated into the wetland complex. And those are in the white hatched area. Another feature that we have with this is the access or maintenance road. If you see the green line kind of toward the top of the screen, that would be the maintenance road to get to the WEIR structure. So if there was erosion taking place, or something was caught on the WEIR structure itself, they would need a way to get to that. So that green line would be the route. The last feature, I believe, of the wetland complex would be road removal. Right now, you can see that 57th Street South and 112th Avenue South both run through this wetland complex. And, if we're going through the restoration, just to make it a continuous area and to ensure that flow and other things are able to move through here, those roads would be removed. I think there's about 7,000 feet of road removed with the road removals. Just a few stats overall on the wetland complex. There's a total of 320 acres. A little under half of that would be actual wetland acres. And then that mandatory 50-foot buffer, there'd also be 70 acres incorporated in that. And then the rest of the acreage, about 100 acres, is inefficiently farmable or inaccessible land areas. Next slide, please. Now we're going to go into more in-depth discussion on assessments that were done to help design some of these features. So I'm going to turn it over to David Hilgeman. He's a hydraulic engineer at the Army Corps, and he'll go through the next several slides here. So David, go ahead. David, are you on mute? Rocky, do you need to unmute David?
I certainly can. He must be calling in by a phone number. I assume he's the 651 number.
No, I don't think so.
No.
Maybe he was unable to join us. I thought I saw him on here earlier. Let's see here.
I don't see him on the list of participants.
Okay. Michelle Larson, are you on the line?
She is.
Michelle, could you cover this?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
Michelle's also
Yeah,
a hydraulic engineer.
I just got a note from David that the meeting's not letting him in, so
Okay.
technology is great, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like the floor is yours then.
Okay, so part of the design of this project was to design this weir that goes across the wetland so that we have a wetland functioning for the majority of time, but also that the parcels around the wetland there, that the 10-year, 24-hour rainfall event would allow the property owner flooding area to be drained outside of the boundaries in less than 24 hours from when the peak elevation, water surface elevation is in the pond, the wetland. Next slide. All right, so this is a diagram showing the extent of the inundation. On the left-hand side, you can see it's displaying what the inundation area. So if the Fargo-Moorhead project wasn't in place, what the existing inundation would become with this rainfall event. And then the right side shows us the big dark area would be the southern embankment there, with the borrow ditch with the blue line that runs alongside the big dark area there. And so that shows us what the wetland would look like with the Fargo-Moorhead project constructed. So this is just existing. This is without building a weir or anything. This is before and after construction of just the Fargo-Moorhead Flood Risk Management Project. Next slide, please. So this is a hydrograph. So it's a function across the bottom axis and the water surface elevation or headwater on the weir on the vertical axis. And so 906.3 is near the bottom. It's the second on the vertical axis. That would be the notch in the weir. So water levels below that wouldn't be draining out except when we use a low flow drain pipe, which is later on in the discussion. And then so this shows us if we have this 24-hour rainfall event, how high the water is going to go. So it gets up to about 0.2 or so. But then within 24 hours of hitting that peak, we want it to be able to drain down to below the design elevation there. Next slide, please. Okay, so the left-hand side is the previous image with the existing inundation. So if the Fargo, this is what the inundation is going to look like. The image on the right hand shows us the project that we're proposing for the Drain 27 wetland. So you can see lines showing where the roads are going to be removed. The yellow line is showing us that weir that kind of blocks off the Drain 27. And that green is just an access road there. So sometimes people ask, well, why is there showing more inundated area with this project when there's a weir across it than there is with existing conditions? That is, with those roads there are some culverts through those roadways that are undersized, and so water doesn't drain off as efficiently. If those roads are removed, those culverts are removed, the water farther upstream can actually drain better, and it'll concentrate more closer in our wetland area itself. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is what the weir looks like. This is a cross. So if you cut a line through straight across the Drain 27, we got the high ground on either side, which is the light gray. You can see the very channel of Drain 27. It's around 901 or so. And so this is showing us an embankment across the drain channel itself. You can see the weir, the notch in the weir at 906.3. The actual full design of the weir itself, what it's going to be made of and everything is a design process, but this is what it would look like. The top of that weir is 909.2. And if you go ahead and go to the next slide. Derek, should I keep going?
Yeah, go ahead if you want, or I can jump in. It doesn't matter.
Okay, so in our weir, there's one of the things that we want to design into it is a low flow pipe. So this would be a way that if you need to do any sort of maintenance, you need to get some of the water drained out of the wetland to do whatever they need to go through and do some, I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm an engineer, everyone, so not if they need to go out and go through and weed it or whatever, remove sediment, whatever they have to do that. So there'll be a way to do some maintenance on it.
Yeah, so I can jump in there a little bit,
Yeah.
Michelle. That low flow pipe, the primary reason for that is just to have another option for maintenance. If there are any, if there's anything that happens to the structure, erosion or any repairs that need to be made, it could be drawn down for that. And then also if we don't get the vegetation response that we're expecting within the wetland, that gives us an option to open it up, drain it down, reseed, and kind of start over with the vegetation within the wetland complex. Next slide.
I'm not sure. This is all built-in versus sheet.
So another design aspect that we've been looking at is recreation, and recreation isn't a feature that's being considered as a part of this project at this time, as part of the Drain 27 project, but it is being looked at by the MetroCog as a whole for the entire Fargo Metro project, and they currently have a recreation plan that they've put together, and that's part of the Agassiz Greenway Master Plan. I've provided a link on the screen here for folks interested in that. But they're also looking at trying to find ways to get the funding, whether that's state, federal, whatever kind of funding, to be able to pay for recreational features. That all being said, even though we're not looking to have the recreational features as part of the Drain 27 wetland restoration, we want to make sure that we're making things that are compatible with them. So we've been having a few conversations with the MetroCog, just asking what kind of thoughts they have, and trying to lay out what good places might be for trails and kiosks and trail accesses, things like that. So more or less keeping them in the back of our minds during design, not necessarily looking to move forward as part of our project, just with different restrictions that we have at this point. Next slide. Now we'll start to talk about drainage. This is a concern that we had at the April 30th meeting. Folks are just wondering, how does the water leave my land, and how does that work over the duration of construction. So we'll go over some construction sequencing, and Michelle will walk us through that as well.
Okay, thanks. Next slide, please. So this is showing existing conditions. It's an aerial photo of Drain 27. You can see the flow arrows through there. Vertically through the middle of it is 57th. My image disappeared, but and then so there we go. Drain 27 crosses 57th Avenue as it goes through there. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is what it would look like with wetland construction. So during the sequence of events of scheduled things in the area, this wetland construction would start in 2022. So the weir would be built and the access road, and then those two parts of the roads removed so that the flow can fill up, go into the wetland. And then when water leaves the wetland, it's going to go drain back into the same Drain 27 channel downstream of it, just like it usually would. Next slide. So then the next piece to be constructed would be the southern embankment, Southeast 2A. So that's the piece in the kind of like that lavender color you can see on the screen. That's going to be in the years 2022 through 2023. While that's under construction, and once it's done, water will still be able to go through Drain 27. It enters a wetland and leaves through the weir and continues back down the Drain 27 channel. Next slide. Then in 2023 through 2024, the southern embankment, the SE2B, is going to be constructed. And they're going to be leaving a gap in the southern embankment there so that the drain 27 drainage can continue on. The actual distance of this gap is still being analyzed and everything, but what you're seeing there is the minimum size of the gap. It could actually be larger than that, but that's what they live there. Next slide. So this is showing the project fully constructed. So the lavender thing you see there is the full southern embankment. Down at the lower left-hand corner is the inlet structure to the diversion channel. There's going to be a borrow ditch that goes alongside the embankment on either side. So water is going to enter drain 27. The weir will be there. It'll flow over the weir, and it will flow into the borrow ditch. So this gap in the southern embankment is going to be the last thing filled, last thing constructed, so that the water can flow there. Let's see. So once the water flows through over the weir, it will flow into the borrow ditch. Right there, it's showing some flow arrows going away from drain 27. The actual split of where it's going to flow to the north or south or east or west is still being finalized, but it may end up being at 112th Avenue, which I don't know if someone can point that out on the screen.
Michelle, I think the next slide might show it better. It
Okay.
still shows the drainage this way, but it has 112th on there.
Okay, there we go. And so this is just another view of this. So you can see where the roads have been removed. Those are the red. The access roads in green, the weirs in yellow. You can see the flow arrows coming through the little channels upstream and ending up in drain 27 wetland. And then the flow going alongside the southern to drain into the either Wild Rice River or the inlet structure. I think that's it for mine. Derek, back to you.
Thanks, Michelle. Next slide, please. Actually, we'll go to Leanne. She's the biologist that put together the environmental assessment, and she'll talk through some of the environmental effects from the project. So Leanne, go ahead.
Okay, so what are some of the environmental effects of the project? The first one we want to discuss is agriculture. With the project, approximately 1 mile of drain 27 would be abandoned, and about 300 acres of land that's currently being farmed would be taken out of production. The Wetland Restoration Project, as we mentioned earlier, has been designed to ensure that farmland outside of the project parcels are not inundated for more than 24 hours following a large summer rainfall event. And also, as we mentioned earlier, in order to fully restore the wetland, we do have to remove portions of 57th Street and 112th Street. And that would be 4,300 linear feet of 57th Street and 2,700 linear feet of 112th Street. We are, as a team, working to make sure that affected residents would have alternate routes for traveling in and out of the area. Next slide. The project would have an overall long-term beneficial effect to wetlands by restoring about 84 acres of wet meadow and 66 acres of marsh-type wetlands. And as Derek went over in the beginning of the presentation, restoration would provide habitat diversity, wildlife habitat, and also has the ability to improve water quality by filtering out sediments, nutrients, and pollutants. And also with the project, we're going to see a big difference in the vegetation in the area. Currently, the area is in row crop production, and that will change to native wetland and prairie vegetation. And if anybody is interested in the species that we plan to plant in this area, we did include the seed mixes as an appendix to the environmental assessment. Next slide. That was just a brief overview of some of the environmental effects. For more information or more details, you can view the environmental assessment, which is on the Corps' website, and maybe somebody can put that link in the chat feature. The environmental assessment was released on July 2nd. If anybody has any comments or questions about the project that you may not feel comfortable discussing here in the public meeting, you can feel free to contact Derek, and we have his contact information there, and there will be an additional slide with his information at the end of the presentation. The comment period does end August 3rd. Next slide.
All right, thanks, Leanne. Next slide here, we're going to talk about the schedule for the project. Right now, we're in project design. We have been since about the beginning of the calendar year this year, and that will go through about the time that we award the contract in the middle of 2021. Also, where we're at right now is the environmental assessment phase, which that started in May of 2020. That's when we started trying to gather some of the information and writing up the NEPA document, the environmental assessment, and that will close sometime in August, barring any significant comments or significant impacts that we have missed. Again, the public comment period closes August 3rd. After the environmental assessment has been wrapped up, or the NEPA portion has been wrapped up, that's when our plans will be nearing the drawings for the project, and we'll be able to start with our land acquisition. That'll be later on this summer, and it'll go for a full year with the acquisition phase. In September of 2021, that's currently when we anticipate the construction contract being awarded, and that would be in the fall of the year. So we would anticipate that the construction would start that following construction season, probably sometime between April or June of the 2022 construction season, and likely last 1 year. Next slide, please. So with that, I guess that's our presentation. You know, we had this up on the screen earlier. If you have any comments you'd like to share about the environmental assessment, feel free to give me a call or to email me at the email shown on the screen. We also had a lot of conversation about a meeting such as this one, just taking away that factor of a smaller discussion. So if people want to have smaller discussions, or if you have like very detailed questions that might not pertain to everyone or might not pertain to the environmental assessment, we could take smaller meetings, you know, at a later time as well. What I would ask is that you either get a hold of me via phone or email, and we can lay out, you know, a set of questions that we would like to ask you, so that we make sure that we have the right people in the room or on the phone to answer the questions that folks may have. So that is an option. Just get a hold of me if you'd like to do that. There was one question, it looks like, while we were going through the presentation. The question was, what will the length of the WEIR be? And Stephen, looks like you had an answer there. If you want to talk through that one, I would encourage you to do that in case there's other questions on it. So Stephen, can you talk to that?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you.
So currently we're going through two designs, one being the total length of the WEIR being 30 feet as an earthen embankment, and comparing that to a sheet pile WEIR system of 25 feet long. It's all part of the life cycle analysis that we're trying to fine tune in the 65% design that we have going on. I believe the sheet pile WEIR is going to be sharp crested weir, and the earthen embankment will be designed with a 4-to-1 slope. I believe that's most of what we know so far.
This is Michelle. I can add to that. So the weir is the notch. There will be something going across the width of the channel with the top elevation of 909.2. But then the notch of the weir, when we talk about the weir, we're talking about the notch area. So two versions, the earthen embankment one is 30 feet wide. And so water would flow
One
over
second,
it just
Michelle. Rocky, can you go back to slide 16? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the earthen embankment would be very, like what we refer to as a broad crested weir. It's trapezoid shape, similar to like just an embankment, and then it would have a riprap covered slope on the downstream side to help dissipate energy. Yep. Then if we did a sheet pile weir, it'd be what we call a sharp crested weir. So the water would over the top of that weir, and it would kind of fall for a few feet down to some riprap to help dissipate energy before it continued flowing downstream. And the notch for the sheet pile weir is a 25-foot wide notch to get the discharge through these different types of weir is different based on the geometry of it and how smooth the flow stuff.
All right, thanks, Michelle.
Yeah.
We also have another question here. Where are the wetlands that are needing to be replaced by this project? And I guess the short answer to that, Christy, is they're all along the southern embankment. So a lot of them are seasonally inundated farmed wetlands. And what that means is that they're currently tilled. These might be areas and fields that you see that don't quite have as good a crop production from year to year, just because they normally have standing water for a portion of the year, or during wet years don't do as well. They're a little more difficult to, I guess, recognize with a naked eye, but looking through many different years of aerial photos and doing some on-site verification, we're pretty confident in the numbers that we had come up with, and also, I guess a number of them as well are also road ditches. Road ditches are considered wetlands. Those wetlands, however, will be mitigated for through the construction of road ditches as part of the project. So I guess if you'd like more detail on that, we could pull out a map and show you where those wetlands are specifically, but they're kind of strung out all along the southern embankment and within the construction boundaries for the different control structures.
Hi, this is Terry. I got a question for you.
Yep.
These wetlands you're talking about, is it not true that a wetland cannot be farmed?
Yeah, I don't know all the background.
I'd like a yes or no, because if we have a wetland on our farm, we are not allowed to farm that. And you're saying that the wetlands that you're replacing are now being farmed. That is not a wetland. In definition, you do not farm a wetland. If that's the case, we're going to be able to farm this wetland that you're creating.
No, I don't know all the background with that, Terry, but I do know that certain areas that have been farmed in the past are given lenience with that. The protection on wetlands, so if it's currently a wetland, and I forget which year this changed, but if it was a wetland currently and it showed all the wetland characteristics, and it has for the last, I don't know how many years, and you went in and started farming it, then that would be a violation. However, there are a number of of wetlands out on the landscape that were either drained and farmed or just farmed at maybe a marginal type farm, or the crop may be marginal, but those are not protected currently. So maybe that's what you're getting at, I guess. They are still wetlands. If you go out and can find the hydrology and it has those wet signatures, those would be considered farmed wetlands.
Then you could put this anywhere in Cass County. It wouldn't have to be here because there are ditches all over Cass County that you could put this. What are the other locations that you were considering? Where are they?
Leanne, do you remember? It's in the environmental assessment. I believe it's drain 51, which is further to the east. There's also a location along the Wild Rice River.
Yep, there's one along the Wild Rice River, and there was also a site in the city of Fargo, south of 52nd Avenue.
Well, that'd be great to put your little park area right there in the city of Fargo along the wetlands, wouldn't it? They wouldn't have to drive out here.
Yeah. As I talked about before, we looked at the pros and cons of the different projects, and unfortunately that area and the things going on around it did not work well together.
Why?
Basically, well, because when you're looking at having mitigation for a wetland, you do not want it to have direct runoff from urbanized area. You can only give it so much credit for that, and that site would be compromised from that. And by the time you have a couple different retention basins, the wetland would have been very minimally sized, and that would then there would need to be more projects to help make up the impacted areas.
In other words, the people in Fargo don't want to, you don't want to get them wet, but you'll get us wet.
No, it's more about the quality of the wetland. The quality of the wetland that would have been made from that project would not have fulfilled the wetland needs for the mitigation.
Where's the location along the Wild Rice River?
Leanne, do you know specifically where that was at?
It is located east of I-29 along the southern embankment.
What section?
That part I don't know. Does Derek know?
Somebody
I do not.
must have studied it.
Yeah, we looked at it, but
Okay.
it was pretty quick to recognize that it wasn't going to be sufficient for the mitigation needed.
So what section was it? I'm curious, in what township? So somebody could look that up, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, is this Christy?
Yep.
Yeah, Christy, I can get back to you on that. I just don't know off the top of my head.
Say, Derek, this is Lyndon. Was that with respect to that Drain 51 wetland site that we were taking a look at? Or is that a different site?
It was the one that was going to be potentially overbank excavation along the river there, I believe.
Okay.
And I think that would have been in conjunction with the borrow site.
Such thing of wetlands along the river makes pretty good sense.
Well, you can mitigate wetlands anywhere in the United States. You can go 30, 50, 100 miles to the west, and there's willing sellers for 1/50th, 1/100th of the cost of what this project's going to cost you. So I don't understand. I don't understand why you would even consider putting a wetlands in this flat ground. Because once you saturate that 320 acres and the cattails come, the water ain't going to drain. So a 2-inch rain event in May or June, our crop is lost. With this wetlands in our flat ground, we will never harvest a crop again within that 3,000 acres.
Yeah, and I guess the data that we've shown hasn't shown that. The reason that the wetland has the buffer around it and the reason that the weir is sized the way it is so that during a 10-year, 24-hour event that the water would be able to drain through this area and drain off of any surrounding areas to this wetland complex.
Water don't flow uphill, and once you have 6-foot cattails and all them ways, it definitely ain't gonna flow in that drain system. So are we gonna be allowed to make alternative ditches into the new drain or the diversion channel?
I don't know if I follow you on that. To the diversion channel, do you mean to the borrow ditches along the outside?
You're gonna have the diversion channel all around. You know, can we make new ditches in there so we can drain our water? All our water now has to go into this wetlands and go through a 5-foot dam. Hey, once that system full, our water can't go nowhere. This wetlands is totally going to destroy the 3,000–4,000 acres around it. We'll never harvest a crop again. We'll get it seeded in April, May. 1 2-inch rain event takes 36 hours, 48 hours to get that water off. Our crop is done.
Yeah, we can look at that further. But at this time, I guess we have nothing to say otherwise that this area would drain adequately. There was a question in the chat that stated that there will be a gap in the embankment before the project becomes fully operational. In the event there is a large flood event during a time when the gap exists, are there any measures that would be in place to protect the embankment from erosion? And the answer to that, I believe, would be no. Is the embankment referring to the southern embankment? Mike, if you're on.
Yeah, just it looked like during construction they were leaving the gap there to allow flows to continue north after they cross the weir structure. I'm just wondering if you did get a large flood event, would there be any issues of kind of blowing that gap out or having any downstream effects with everything kind of being channelized to that area?
It's expensive.
Yeah. Michelle, have you been part of that gap analysis, or Lyndon?
This is Michelle. No, I haven't. I can't help you with that.
Okay.
Hey, Derek, this is Lyndon. I've just been in a couple of meetings, and I know that gap analysis is in progress. It's part of the Southern Embankment design. And so that's still being studied and evaluated.
Yeah, and part of that gap analysis, Mike, that we're referring to, they're looking at what the best size of that gap is to make sure that impacts are minimized overall during that kind of interim time period when the project's being constructed but not operational yet. So unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you on that one.
This is Mike Dubord. I'm talking for my mother, but anyway, we've got 160 acres there, and about half of it will be taken. Why not buy the whole 160 acres from us? Then I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, Dean, are you on? So Dean is part of the land acquisition team, and he might be able to answer that question better.
Yeah, hi, this is Dean with AE2S. Yeah, I believe the Dorothy Dubard parcel is on the southern edge of just south of 112th Avenue South. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. We can sure look at those scenarios because we have done some full acquisitions in the area, especially in the I guess what's referred to as the Camel Hump area. So.
Okay, there's two different, on one of the maps you had shown, you got two different shaded area. What is the difference between the two?
Rocky, can you maybe jump to one of the overall project maps for Derek?
Okay, yeah, you see. Okay, you got two different shaded areas. You know, the hashed areas.
Yeah.
What's the difference between the two?
So I can cover this one. So you've got the blue, light blue, and the green areas. The light blue is a marsh type wetland.
Right.
The green area is like a wet meadow. So that might, to most people, resemble more of a prairie-like wetland, a transitional wetland. And then you've got the hatched area, which is an area that we went through and looked at different parcels and tried to determine where the best place to break the parcels would be. So,
I understand that, but in the hatch areas, you got two different sections of that.
Oh, you mean where there's maybe boxes of hatched areas?
Well,
I think that's just. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just wondering what's the difference of those two hatches areas?
Yeah, I think that's just a product of the map layer being made. They could probably be dissolved together, so that was one continuous area.
And with this marsh, are you going to see that the groundwater is going to get it'll get not evaporate, but soak into the rest of the lands by, and it'll cause farming problems?
Yeah, so again, that's some of the reason for having that that buffer area and for having that the wet meadow area around the actual marsh. So if you think about it as what you'd see with a naked eye as far as the standing water goes, that would be the blue, and then 1 foot higher in elevation is the area in green, and you know that tends to spread out pretty far with just the flat nature of this area. So we don't believe that it will affect the adjacent farms outside of that white hatch.
Well, put drain tile around it. So it doesn't happen.
Yeah, that could be something that we look into.
I got another question here. You talked about some wetlands and some ditches and stuff. I don't know how man-made ditches can all of a sudden be a wetlands. They weren't wetlands, so and then also in 1986, Soil Conservation declared that Stanley and Pleasant Township had no wetlands. So I don't know where you're coming up with these wetlands in Stanley or Pleasant Township.
Yeah, I think the science behind wetland identification has come a long way, especially with all the new technology that's out there. And to answer your question about the ditches, you know, again, a wetland goes back to those three characteristics: the soils, the hydrology, and the vegetation. So if those three things can be produced in an area, it is considered a wetland. So you might be driving down the road and see cattails in the ditch. Those are ditched wetlands. They may be man-made, but they are still wetlands.
How many years back do you go for these wetlands? You're talking 300-400 years?
The ones that we've delineated, or the ones that were in this Drain 27 area?
Well, go for Drain 27. How many years back was it a wetland?
Yeah, I guess that we don't know for sure. We've just taken the body of information that we have in front of us and, you know, asked some wetland specialists, and the determination was that at one time prior to this being ditched, it was likely a wetland.
So it probably was back when Lake Agassiz was draining on its own and then held water for a little bit. So that's a wetland, huh?
No, I don't think it was that long ago.
Well, you,
I mean,
you
we're
say
not
you
looking
don't
at
know.
geologic
You say you
time.
don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I don't think that ever was a wetland.
This is Terry again. I got a question. You never really did, I don't know if you can give us the information as to where you identified this 160 acres of wetland that you have to replace.
Yep, I can provide you with that information. I do not have it readily available on the screen right now, but it is along the embankment.
Why weren't there any public meetings when you considered the other locations?
We were trying to make sure that we had something we were proposing in order to have the public meeting.
Well, why wouldn't you have had a public meeting if you proposed it? Why couldn't you have proposed it within the city limits and had your public meeting then, instead of having it now after you've decided where you want to put it?
Yeah, I guess there's
a public forum where we can just express, and maybe the people in Fargo would have wanted it, have a nice little wetland right in their city limits. And you never had a public forum about it, so how do you know?
Yeah, and Terry, what it comes down to is that wetland wouldn't have met the needs of the project. It would have been a very large area, very expensive, and there would have been very little credit that would have been able to be applied to the impacts. So you would have maybe needed 10 projects like that to get the amount of credit needed to produce the wetlands.
If you had other sites, you had the Wild Rice River, you had Drain 51. Why couldn't you spread them out a little bit? Why are you constantly after us out in this location? It's bad enough you're going to bury us in 8 feet of water, and now you want to destroy the drainage that we have left. Isn't enough for this area out here? How much do we have to bear when it comes to this diversion project?
Yeah, I understand the frustration. You know,
No,
I
I'm
guess,
sorry. I don't think anybody on that board does understand the frustration. Because none of you live out here. None of you make your living off this land. So it really doesn't matter to anybody else other than the people living out here and how you're destroying our area. And I think it's time somebody wake up and realize what's happening out here. Because nobody else is here to protect us. Everybody's just forcing it on this area, and we just have very little say anymore.
Yeah, thanks for the comment. I think the big factor for this area was that for a relatively frequent flood event, a 10-year or a little less than 10-year flood event, regardless of if the wetland mitigation project was built or not, you would basically have water resembling what's on the screen right now in that area. So being that that's the case.
Wouldn't, Derek, because we wouldn't have that 5-foot concrete dam. I mean, the channel would be empty. And in a spring, summer rain event, we have that channel for the water to get in and get off. And then a couple statements earlier, Derek, you said it would be cost prohibitive to do it by Fargo. Well, now if you're worried about cost, go 50, 100 miles to the west. And like I say, you would do this. There's willing sellers for 1/50th, 100th of the cost. And then you wouldn't have anybody mad because there are willing sellers out there.
Yeah, there's a process for trying to identify wetlands and trying to mitigate. So you want to stay as close to the project impacts as possible. And there's different bank credit areas, and the area for this area, there wasn't enough available. And maybe what you're referring to going further west is outside of this credit area, but to my knowledge, at least at the time when we started this, there wasn't available credits within this bank area.
This is Christy. Don't ever forget that all of this area was dry. Long before your project, we didn't have a problem with water. So just keep that in the back of your minds every time you draw your maps. Just remember that we were all dry and we were making a living and worked hard for our land and paid for it. Back to the wetlands area, South Fargo that's developing. I'm thinking that would all probably be, when you got down to the brass tacks, considered wetlands area too that you're building your development on. Am I right? If we are considered wetlands out here, I'm probably thinking a lot of that area that you're building on now is wetland in the city of Fargo. Just a thought.
Thanks for that thought. Appreciate it.
You gotta remember, in the 97 flood, the 2009 flood, this drain 27 right there was pretty well drained down. We have never, ever, ever in this area had to lay a sandbag. So this is some of the highest ground around, close to that ridge. So
I got a question.
Yep.
Am I on?
Yep, you're on.
Couple things. Drainage through these native grasses, tall grasses, whatever you're going to put there. We raise a lot of corn these days, and when that grass fills up with corn stalks, she's not draining. Number two, you've got concern about this area draining anyway. Well, because of backup from the Wild Rice River. What would it look like if you made this borrow ditch from drain 27 drain to the inlet structure and then put a control structure so it can't back up into this into drain 27?
Yeah, that's a good thought. I appreciate the comment with the corn stalks. That's something we'll have to think about further and how we deal with that. And then the comment about the drainage toward the inlet structure, that has some issues surrounding it. One of the issues is the diversion channel itself is limiting the flow down the diversion channel. So when the project is not in operation, the natural resource agencies have voiced their opinion that they do not want water flowing down that channel any more than as necessary. So in conjunction with those resource agencies, the decision to have water go away from the inlet was something that was made quite a while ago.
Okay, when we get a heavy rain, 2 inches or more, and if it's not off the fields in 24 hours, is the FM diversion going to pay for our crop?
I'd have to ask somebody from the diversion authority to answer that one.
Can you guarantee it'd be off in 24 hours?
Our modeling has shown that it would be. Unfortunately, the modeler was unable to sign in here, so.
Hi, this is Jerry again. Say, what rainfall amount are you using in that 24-hour period?
Michelle, are you familiar with what was used?
It is a 10-year, 24-hour event. I'm scrolling the report to see if I can find that. We
So
did that
I think,
modeling.
is the question how many inches of rain in 24 hours are we talking?
Right.
Yep.
For your modeling, what are you using for a rainfall event?
Yep.
I think it's 3.2 inches of rainfall. That's what we have in the EA.
Okay, I think this summer, if you look back at any of the records around eastern North Dakota, there's been numerous 3.2 inches and probably more like 4, 5, and 6. So then what happens? Going back to the question that Mike asked, who's going to pay for our losses out here? Because if we get 5 inches, we're done trying to drain through this area. So we need so what's going to happen to that?
Okay, without this drain, without this weir, how long would it take to drain the same area with a 3-inch rain versus with this weir? Are we double the time, triple the time?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to slide number 8. Wait. Yeah, is it slide 8?
I need a computer.
Can you navigate to that, Rocky? Oh, sorry, that's not the right one. It's the one with the side-by-side images. Yeah, so that's what it looks like here. And what the modeling is shown is the one on the left is without the Fargo project, and the one on the right is with the Fargo project but without the wetland mitigation. So you can see it's basically the same thing. Now, if you go 2 slides further, now this is showing that second picture. So with the flood risk management project in place on the left, what the 24-hour rain event would look like, and then on the right, what it would look like in a 24-hour rain event, 24-hour 10-year rain event. So there's areas within the wetland mitigation site that would be wetter because of the weir, but there's a lot of areas upstream of 112th Avenue that would actually have some benefit, because taking that road out would allow the water to get down to that weir faster. So I'm not sure if that answers the question totally or not, but that might be the best we have.
I can see this happening every year. Not a 10-year event, every year. You look back at the last 4 or 5 years, we've had 2 to 3 inch rain events very often.
Yeah, it seems like a 10-year event is becoming more and more common, which you know, makes a 10-year event higher and higher.
Well, who would know who would pay for our crop damage and our land value? See, my mom doesn't farm the land; she rents it out. But if this cropland is going to be drowned out every other year, there's nobody going to buy it for what it's worth before this damn thing goes in.
Yeah, does anybody from the land acquisition team or from the diversion authority have an answer for that one?
This is Dean from A2S. There is a summertime rain insurance program that is being put in place to not only cover, you know, any folks within the upstream mitigation area in this area or any other area that has a summer rain event that would impact those areas that are, you know, inundated by, or would be inundated by water during a project operation.
Okay, who's, you say insurance, who's paying for that? The landowners gotta pay for that?
Nope, it is paid for by the diversion.
And what are they talking, full disaster, or how does that work?
I don't have the details of it right in front of me. I know we've been working on it, and we've gotten some feedback here just as of late. And one of the things that we're progressing through with one of the carriers, that we've been involved with for quite some time. So I'm looking to pull it up on the mitigation plan, but I'm not finding it right away here. But.
Do you have any other questions or comments regarding the overall project? I mean, if there are other questions that are particular to certain tracts of land, or just real specific, we could handle those at a separate meeting as well.
I have a question. When you talk about the diversion authority paying for this crop insurance, don't forget that the money that the diversion authority gets, one way or the other, comes out of our pocket as taxpayers. So an expense is an expense to me. Second thing before we go, and I don't know if everyone else is done, but my last comment is, the next time you do a slide presentation, I don't want to see how great the recreation is going to be along any of these projects. To me, that's a kick in the gut. It's not about recreation at all.
Yep. And that was just to be transparent with the different things being considered. So it was just included for that reason.
That again is going to be paid for by the diversion, which is also comes out of my taxes, whether it's state or federal or county money.
My feeling on this wetlands project here in this flat land should be dead on arrival. I mean, you have so many other options.
If there are other options that you have out there, feel free to send them our way. We'd like to hear about them.
I've got a question.
Yep.
Back to this one gal that said never had to have sandbags around here or nothing. I live right on drain 27, and I've never had to have a sandbag at all. And how can this be wetlands if people in Fargo got to have thousands of sandbags and I don't need a single one?
Are you just south of 112th Avenue South?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it does seem like that gets constrained pretty tight around that. Like it doesn't spread out much, so there must be a little bit of elevation there.
Yes.
All right, Rocky, if you could go to the last slide again, please. If you folks have some comments that you'd like to send my way, let me know. We can try to look into any comments you guys have and incorporate them into the environmental assessment and look into them further. And again, if you'd like to have more discussion, smaller meetings with subject matter experts, that sort of thing, also contact me and we'll try to get those set up. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Have a good night.